Just about everybody pegged this as the game of the year in the Big Ten. It's not quite living up to the standard at this point based on the records coming in and the shocking result in Bloomington, but it's still huge in Happy Valley with Penn State hosting Ohio State. We got Tim Aiden on the line from Black Shoe Diaries to help us break it down right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Smash that like button, subscribe. That way you know we're going live as soon as you hit the bell for the notifications. All right, Tim, how you doing? Have you recovered?
Actually, I recovered quicker than probably most of my Black Shoe Diaries colleagues did. I don't know. Maybe it's just because of just this whole season in general, just how COVID's affected everything and how Big Ten was on and then it wasn't. Now it's on again. And then now you've got Wisconsin, Nebraska getting canceled because, you know, a third of their team comes down, Wisconsin's team comes down with COVID. And just before we started broadcasting, got the news about Trevor Lawrence being out for Clemson because of COVID. It's just, I don't know, it just to me feels like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a normal kind of season where I would typically have gotten worked up over a loss like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was infuriating, and I will go to my grave adamant that Michael Penix was short on the extension, but I got over it pretty quickly. I to be honest, actually, I gotta give props to Penn State on creativity there. I've never seen my teams lose in that type of creative fashion by scoring a touchdown late when they shouldn't have. I mean, we saw the Atlanta Falcons do it the next day too, but in their game against Detroit Lions, but. I've never before this past weekend saw a team, you know, be up one, score a touchdown and late when they shouldn't have, and have that come back to bite them in the behind like it did. And and just the way they dominated. Look at how they dominated the stat sheet too. 488 to 211 yards. I mean, if you showed that to just anybody and didn't show them the score, they probably would have thought Penn State would have romped by 3 touchdowns, but. You know, just too many, dumb mistakes, especially in the first half, which was just one of the ugliest halves of football I've seen from a Penn State team in years. They did seem to get their act together a bit more in the second half, and that allowed them to come back and what they should have, ended in regulation, but we all know what happened. So, I'm done touching on that. There's you got Ohio State in 2 days, which, not looking too promising, but as we're kind of mentioning before we record, this is Ohio State is a team that it seems no matter how big of an underdog Penn State is, James Franklin has his guys ready to brawl with the Buckeyes and put up a fight, no matter how much things are stacked against them. What comes to mind to me is 2014, Franklin's first year, when he took over a program that was at the nadir of the sanctions. Like he was down to about half the number of scholarships that Ohio State had, and that was the Ohio State team that ended up winning the national championship that year. But Ohio State comes in undefeated. Penn State's just fighting for bowl eligibility, and the Buckeyes jumped out to a 17-zip lead early on at halftime, and Penn State ran off 17 straight in the second half somehow, and forced overtime. It took some JT Barrett heroics and Joey Bosa pushing a offensive lineman to Christian Hackenberg on 4th down to finally end it. So it's a game like that sticks out to me because pretty much every game since then, there's maybe one exception, 2015, which Ohio State won 35-10, but even that was within 2 touchdowns, 2 scores, I should say, going into the fourth quarter. Ohio State got a couple turnovers, turned into short fields, and ended up, making the score game look more like a blowout than it was. But digress a little. It's as much as it's tempting to say Ohio State's going to completely annihilate Penn State. the evidence from what I've seen in the first 6 Penn State Ohio State outings of the Franklin era tell me otherwise. So, yeah, so I would I would expect, despite no crowd there for the whiteouts, their team's going to bring its own juice. The DJ for Beaver Stadium will be blasting that music, probably cranking it up to 11 or 12 on the volume scale, to try and just try to create that atmosphere as much as you possibly can. If you're not going to, unfortunately, we're not going to get that 107,000 plus screaming white clad fans this year, but try and make do.
Tim Aiden talking Penn State, Ohio State in Happy Valley on Saturday night. You can catch Tim and the rest of the crew there at Black Shoe Diaries on SB Nation. All right. I've given my rundown on Penn State, Indiana so many times back and forth and been asked about it for the last several days ever since it happened. So I will summarize it as they dominated the game. They made too many mistakes, obviously. The Clifford interceptions, the missed field goals, getting stopped on 4th down in the red zone, fumbling at the 5-yard line, on and on. James Franklin blew it at the end. He should have instructed his team better. I won't go through the rest of that because I've done it again about 52 times. All right. Looking at this game, and again, most anticipated game in the Big Ten before the season. Now we see Penn State loses at Indiana. We see what Michigan does to Minnesota, and now there's some public lean toward Michigan being the challenger to Ohio State. Well, we'll see on Saturday night. So the one thing I will say about this Penn State team is this personnel, and just because of the losses, they look and feel like a different team than what we were expecting. Not just because they lost at Indiana, but losing one of the best backs in the nation, Journey Brown, losing his backup, a top 5 recruited running back out of high school, losing maybe the best defensive player in the Big Ten before the season started to opt out, Micah Parsons. Now losing for the first half of the game one of your defensive leaders, Jesse Lucchetta. And beyond that, and maybe not necessarily finding that other complementary receiver to Jahan Dotson, who may not even be proving to be a number 1 guy himself, just maybe not quite the team that we were expecting to see here in 2020.
Well, you touched on it. So the current offense coordinator, Kirk Shiraka, his offense is predicated on pounding the rock to help, establish a passing game, to help, it really predicated on ball control and just, kind of just picking up little chunks of yardage along the way, as opposed to the previous systems that Ricky Ronnie and Joe Moorhead ran, which, relied a lot on explosive plays. So those offenses are kind of more boom or bust, whereas Shiraka is more about consistency and avoiding 3 and outs. And to his credit, despite I guess for lack of a better term, having a one-hand tie behind his back, not having his top 2 running backs that he thought he would be available before the season in Brown and Kane, they actually only went 3 and out once against Indiana. So that is a kind of a hidden overlook improvement from past seasons. I mean, I can still remember a couple games last year where Penn State would jump out. They have a couple really good drives for touchdowns, and then it would just be like 5 or 6 straight 3 and out drives, and that would allow the other team to kind of hang around and maybe come back. Like the whiteout game against Michigan's the best example of that, probably. So it's a good ball control offense. The problem is, though, when Noah Cain went down on that first drive, he lost his road grader, like the guy that he was relying upon to just pick up those, on 1st and 10, he picks up 4 or 5 yards, makes it 2nd and manageable. Or, it's 3rd and short. You just need to get a couple of yards and move the chains. Like Noah Cain is that Mr. Reliable in that sense. So to lose him, especially on that first drive, was, definitely you saw the effects later on. And, no disrespect to Devin Ford. He's a talented kid. I still very much have faith in him. I think he this is a golden opportunity now for him to get starter level reps, and perhaps by the end of this season he can be more of an every down back. But he's kind of he's definitely more of a speedster type as opposed to a guy you want to be running right at the defense. But I guess on the plus side, Kevon Lee, freshman running back, who he actually showed some promise, kind of filling in that Kane role. I mean, he's not saying he's Noah Kane, but he does have that. He brings that power that Noah had. He's like 6'2", 230 pounds, which is massive for a running back. So it's he had some promising, like, powerful runs against Indiana. They're going to need probably a combination of those two, provide some lightning and thunder in the ground game to to help give Penn State a chance in this one, because they can't. It's pretty clear they can't rely on Sean Clifford's arm alone to try to help them to a victory. And I think you're gonna see it. I know Kirk Sherrod is not big on running the quarterback, but you saw in the second half of the Indiana game when he allowed Clifford to kind of improvise and take off and run if necessary, or they even called some RPO, where Clifford could keep it if he saw what he liked.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily know that Sean Clifford had 119 yards rushing in him.
Yeah, he still got it, Mark. Still got those legs. Especially that scramble he had for the touchdown against Indiana. I mean, to me that was vintage Sean Clifford. Ideally you'd like him to be more a pocket passer type, but it's kind of clear he's most effective, at least when he presents the threat of being able to, rip some big runs off on you. So I think going forward, you're kind of going to see more of a 2019 Clifford in that sense. And of course, the downside to that is, as you might remember, Cliff really got banged up towards the end of the season to the point where he didn't even play in the season finale against Rutgers. Not that he didn't beat Rutgers, but that's how badly he was hurt. They felt like they would rather just rest him and just take a chance on Will Levis being the starter than to get Cliff hurt before the bowl game. So, my concern is, if he gets injured, or if he just gets beat down enough, and doesn't have a proven backup behind. Levis, he came in once last week and fumbled on his possession, and so it's pretty dicey as far as quarterback depth. So but at the same time, I feel like the offense showed some real life when Clifford at least presented the ability to run. So you're probably going to see some of that on Saturday too. But yeah, I think the thing that really needs, but he really does also need to find, there needs to be another receiver that steps up besides Jahan Dotson. And, I saw a couple, Parker Washington, true freshman, he came up with some big time, especially in the overtime period. He caught the nice rollout pass from Clifford, which initially put Penn State up in overtime. Of course, Indiana scored a touchdown and got the 2-point conversion after that. But I'm sure it was a nice confidence booster for him to get his first collegiate touchdown in that fashion. So he's a guy I'll be looking for going forward. Cam Sullivan-Brown was a guy who was expected to start, but ended up not playing at all against Indiana. Apparently this wasn't COVID related, but there was something that Franklin wouldn't disclose. Could have been some injury. He made the trip to Indiana. We'll see if he plays at all this Saturday against Ohio State. He's a guy in the past has proven to be a good possession receiver, and if he can step up and be a reliable set of hands, that can go a long way. Of course, Pat Freiermuth, he's a guy who should be targeted early and often in the passing attack, and he did catch 7 passes last week, including a touchdown on the opening drive. So I'm sure he will be targeted a lot. And I'm sure Ohio State will be zeroing in on him too. So maybe doubling up on him and try to, force Cliff to find someone else to throw to. So so that's where I have some pause. The passing game that was kind of dicey. And of course, they're still trying to figure out how the running attack's going to work. Now with Brown and Kane out, so the key, I think, if Penn State's going to pull the upset, they're going to have to, just have long time possession on their drives, and those drives have to finish with scores. They don't all necessarily be touchdowns, but they got to, some have to be touchdowns. But they got to come away with points on these long drives. They can't afford to march downfield and then, either fail to convert a fourth down or doink a field goal from 25 yards out like they did last week. They gotta make the most of their opportunities. And if the defense may have to help create some short fields for the offense to work with. That's, frankly, in the upset again in 2016, special teams came up huge with some big plays as well. And that's a really set off some alarm bells last week, was seeing special teams be so horrible after being such a big factor in 2019. It seems very uncharacteristic of Joe Lorig's unit, but they almost fumbled away a punt. They muffed a kickoff, ended up starting at their own 4-yard line. I think I mentioned Jake Pinniger, who was Mr. Reliable last year, missed a pair of field goals. One of them just hitting a 25-yard hit off the upright before halftime, which, they should have been down 17-10 instead of 17-7. Then, Jordan Stout had a nice, almost got the 57-yarder to go through, but came up just short. But in general, the only bright side with special teams was kickoffs. Stout put all his kickoffs in the end zone for touchbacks, but they're going to need to come up with some big plays, either like some big returns, or maybe get another block 6 somehow, or block some punts. But it's going to take, I think, defense especially to come up really big, because if you're going to try to rely on the offense alone, it's not going to end well.
Yeah, I would think that another huge game out of Shaka Toney might be a key component to pulling off the upset. And when I say a big game, talking about that final drive in particular, when he couldn't be stopped, or what should have been the final drive for Indiana, when it looked like that was going to be the final drive, when he was coming off the edge, got 2 consecutive sacks, and then he forced he might as well have had a 3rd sack, because Penix just had to throw the ball away because he was about to get sacked. That would be key in putting some pressure on that Ohio State passing game that went 20 for 21 against Nebraska. Tim Aiden on the line from Black Shoe Diaries. Ohio State, Penn State, much anticipated, of course, regardless of the result in Bloomington. Is the Penn State season over if they lose to Ohio State?
No, it's not. I really think this is, now we're talking from a playoff standpoint, of course, but to be frank, after seeing the performance last week, I wrote off the idea of this being a playoff team. I guess, like you touched on, you're missing your top 2 running backs. Micah Parsons opted out, so you don't have a team that you thought you were going to have, several months ago. It's a different team right now. And on the plus side of that, though, is there's some young talent that's going to end up growing as the season goes along. And so my hope is, those kids will improve by the end of the year, and they can take that into 2021. And, hopefully we get a more normal season in 2021 that, they they can really shine by then. Unfortunately, of course, the schedule, I think that's probably a different other show, but the schedule is in 2021 is definitely tougher, in my opinion, for Penn State. You get the start of the road at Wisconsin to open the year, and then 2 weeks later you have Auburn at home, and not to mention you have Ohio State, Michigan back-to-back weeks in November. So, tough schedule next year, but hopefully these young guys can build some key experience, which they can carry over into next year and perhaps his team could be further along than they otherwise would have.
Penn State, Ohio State, and Happy Valley. Tim Aiden joining us from Black Shoe Diaries. Appreciate it, Tim.
Thanks, Mark.